Moving into that cul-de-sac on Rosebriar Lane felt like a fresh start, something I desperately needed after spending 5 years working split shifts at the downtown postal branch, dealing with impossible delivery routes, whether that couldn't make up its mind, and customers who believed their missing Amazon packages were my personal failure. After a recent promotion and transfer, I was finally able to buy my own home, a cozy single-story craftsman with a white picket fence, a wraparound porch, and a perfectly positioned mailbox affixed to a classic black post. As someone who worked for the United States Postal Service, you could say I had a thing for mailboxes. I knew the USPS regulations better than I knew my mother's birthday, and I took pride in the little things, labels perfectly aligned, outgoing flag in good condition, zero rust. It might have been small, but it was mine. At first, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Kids played basketball in driveways, dogs were walked with smiles and waves, and folks nodded politely as I jogged past in the morning. But as early as the second week, I started to notice something off. My mail began arriving opened, or rather resealed. One day, a credit card offer was delivered already sliced open at the edge. Another time, a padded envelope had been torn along the seam and tapped shut, lazily. I asked my carrier about it, someone I used to work with, and he swore the items were intact when he dropped them off. It wasn't just the torn mail. Packages started arriving days late, even though tracking said they were delivered on time. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. The system wasn't perfect. But then came the magazine. It was a collector's edition of Postal History Monthly, yes, a real publication, and yes, I subscribed. When it finally arrived, it was dog-eared and missing 3 pages, including the cover story on canceled Civil War stamps I'd been waiting to read. That's when I knew something was very wrong. I started doing low-key surveillance, noting the exact times deliveries occurred, when neighbors were outside, and when things looked disturbed. That's when I began to notice the same person always hanging around near my place at odd times. Her name was Karen, and she was, in every way, the Karen. Mid-50s tall, platinum bob hair with streaks of blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses that hid beady eyes, a tiny dog named Muffin she never seemed to pick up after, and an HOA badge she wore like a police badge. The first time she approached me was under the pretense of welcoming me to the neighborhood, but the questions came fast and strange. "So you work for the post office?" she'd asked, tilting her head. "Are those good benefits? Do you have a key to everyone's mailbox?" She added with a laugh that didn't sound like a joke. I smiled politely, gave vague answers, and went back inside feeling uneasy. After that encounter, the weirdness escalated. I began finding moved mail, items I had sorted sitting in new places, packages that arrived dented or tampered with, and one time, a missed delivery slip for a package I hadn't ordered, and that didn't belong to me. At first, I thought maybe the mail thief was a porch pirate. But the mailbox meddling told me it was someone with a level of comfort, someone who wasn't afraid to be seen on my porch in broad daylight. I checked with the local office, no Ms. routes. I double-checked the security camera I'd installed by the door. Nothing. But I realized then that the mailbox itself had no coverage. That same week, I ran into Karen again. She was walking Muffin, or rather, letting Muffin bark at birds while she stood near the edge of my lawn. "Still having trouble with your mail," she said without any prompting. "Maybe you ought to get a lockbox." Her smile was tight, and I suddenly noticed something, a smudge of sticky label residue on the back of her hand, the kind that sticks when you peel off shipping tape in a hurry. That night, I filed a formal request with a local postmaster for a surveillance advisory, a protocol used internally when postal employees suspect criminal activity involving mail. It wasn't a police matter yet, but I was preparing. The next morning, a manila envelope arrived addressed to me, but in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a catalog for a vitamin supplement I'd never heard of, but it had my name on it. The label looked lifted and reapplied. I turned the envelope over and scanned the edges. There it was, heat damage from resealing. She was opening my mail with a steam kettle or iron, the oldest trick in the book. I was being targeted. And worse, it was someone who thought she had the right. But what Karen didn't know, what none of these people knew, was that I was not just some postal worker. I had been trained in fraud detection, internal theft recovery, and I had contacts who specialized in federal mail crime. Karen was about to find out what it meant to mess with someone who worked for the U.S. Postal Service. And I wasn't going to just stop her. I was going to make sure she'd never look at a mailbox the same way again. After weeks of observing strange disturbances and steadily gathering subtle clues, I knew Karen was behind the mailbox tampering, but I didn't have proof yet. That's the thing about mail crimes. They're federal offenses, sure, but unless you catch someone red-handed or have irrefutable evidence, it becomes a long bureaucratic waiting game. And the last thing I wanted was for Karen to catch wind that I was onto her before I had her dead to rights. So I went quiet. I stopped acting suspicious. I made sure to give her the impression I just accepted the occasional accidental misdelivery as part of life. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for something bigger. Meanwhile, Karen, thinking I was passive or clueless, got bolder. It started with her just walking by my house a little more often. I'd see her outside 3-4 times a day, usually pretending to fuss with her dog or make casual conversation with neighbors within earshot of my porch. But she always found an excuse to get near my mailbox. Once, I watched her lean over and adjust the flap, claiming it had fallen crooked. Another time, I came out just in time to see her squinting into the opening, like she was trying to read labels inside. "Just checking for my mail," she laughed, even though hers was 2 doors down. I wanted to confront her so badly right then and there, but patience would serve me better. So I installed a micro-hidden camera inside a decoy sprinkler head-facing mailbox, a $150 investment that looked like part of the landscaping and could stream 4K footage to my phone. I also affixed a small motion sensor near the post, covert, built into what looked like a reflector. Every time someone approached within 2 feet of the mailbox, it pinged me. Within 24 hours, I had hits. Karen walked past my mailbox at 7:19 a.m. and paused. She bent slightly, looked around, and tapped the side of it. Just a tap. But it wasn't random. She was checking to see if it had been recently opened, probably trying to time when I retrieved my mail. Then came the drop test. I placed a bait piece of mail inside, a fake pre-approval envelope for a credit card, complete with realistic USPS markings, a fake financial institution logo, and a customized barcode that would tell me if the envelope had been opened or removed. The barcodes were something I designed back during my audit training, hidden UV-reactive markings that smeared when exposed to steam or heat. Within 2 days, the envelope was gone, and when it reappeared in the mailbox 24 hours later, it had been resealed poorly. The barcode had melted. Karen had tried to open it. Still, I didn't confront her. I wanted to see how far she was willing to go. The next step in her spiral was surveillance escalation. I caught her installing a Ring camera pointed directly at my front porch. It wasn't even subtle, mounted on her window frame at an angle that made it clear she wanted a full view of my property. She tried to claim it was for package security after a fake incident where she said a teenager had walked across her lawn. No one else saw it. No one else's cameras caught it. But her camera stayed up. Then, one evening, I returned home earlier than usual and caught her standing halfway up my driveway. She turned fast, fake smiled, and said, "Oh, I think your mailbox had something poking out. I was just going to fix it." Her hand was already halfway into the slot. My blood boiled, but I held it back. I needed one more thing, one last piece of undeniable proof. So I called in a favor. A contact of mine at the Postal Inspection Service, the law enforcement arm of the USPS, agreed to assist me in a proactive deterrence operation. Translation: baiting the trap legally. I created a dummy package, nothing harmful or dangerous, but labeled to appear like it contains sensitive documents. Priority 2 day with fake tracking data and a tamper indicator built in. It had a small embedded RFID tag program to alert me if it moved more than 10 feet from the mailbox, and a timestamp sensor that would activate upon breach. I placed it in the mailbox on a Wednesday. Thursday morning, the alert hit at 8:41 a.m. Package moved. Breach detected. Karen had struck again. That evening, I watched her from across the street as she pretended to water a bush that had already drowned from 3 days of rain. My camera caught her slipping a piece of mail from her hoodie pocket and stuffing it into my box, backwards, like she'd been reading it. She adjusted her sunglasses, turned, and walked away like nothing happened. What she didn't know was that I now had 5 high-resolution video angles, RFID timestamps, sensor logs, and the contents of the package, all untouched and ready to be turned over. She was toast. And the time had come to make sure Karen understood that stealing someone's mail is not only creepy, it's a federal crime punishable by prison time. When I say I set a trap, I don't mean the kind you find in a cartoon with a box and a stick. I mean a full-blown, federally compliant sting operation backed by the United States Postal Inspection Service designed to catch a mail thief red-handed with no room for deniability. Once Karen crossed the line and tampered with my bait package, it wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance anymore. It was a criminal investigation. I contacted Inspector Matthews, a no-nonsense postal investigator I trained with during my rotation through the office of the Inspector General's Compliance Unit. I handed over everything: timestamps, RFID data, video logs, and the manipulated mail I'd retrieved. He reviewed the evidence, nodded once, and said, "She's toast. Let's make it official." The first step was to make sure Karen couldn't claim ignorance or mistake. So we created a second package, similar to the first, but this time clearly marked with an official USPS seal and a warning in bold red ink. Tampering with this parcel is a federal offense. 18 U.S. Code Section 1708. Inside, instead of actual sensitive material, we inserted a printed document stating in plain English that the item was part of a mail theft investigation. Think of it like a reverse mousetrap. When she opened it, it would trigger an internal RFID reader embedded in the paper, which would send a silent alert directly to my network. The moment the paper was fully unfolded, the signal would ping my phone and notify Inspector Matthews' database. We prepped everything carefully. The bait package looked completely legitimate. Padded brown envelope, barcode label, forged credentials for a fake legal firm, with real feeling weight and heft. And best of all, the envelope had a covert tier tag. If she opened it, the strip would separate the flap into visible fibers, making it impossible to reseal without obvious damage. Matthews made sure the trap complied with federal surveillance standards. Since I was the legal recipient of the mail, and I was authorizing monitoring on my own property, the setup was fully legit. He even got me clearance to install a second covert camera disguised as a mailbox decal that would catch the culprit from a front-facing angle with high audio pickup. I set the trap on a Thursday morning. Karen had developed a pattern. Every Thursday, she would do a mail walk, pretend little morning stroll with Muffin, the yappy little Pomeranian. She usually took this time to loiter around neighbors' boxes under the guise of chatting or inspecting HOA infractions. But every time, she veered closer to mine. That Thursday was no different. The moment I slid the bait parcel into the mailbox, I activated all 3 surveillance points. From inside the front window, I had a view of the street. From my phone, I had a live feed. And from Matthews' end, the alert system was armed and ready. At exactly 9:13 a.m., Karen made her move. She rounded the corner like usual, sunglasses on, lips pursed, and leash held lazily in one hand. Muffin was busy trying to attack a bush as Karen glanced around like she was in a spy movie. Her head turned left, then right. No cars, no witnesses. She stepped casually onto my lawn, took one last look, and then reached into my mailbox. The moment her fingers touched the bait package, the motion sensor lit up. She pulled it out, held it at an angle, and quickly stuffed it under her oversized hoodie like it was nothing more than an afternoon errand. The second she broke the seal, ping. My phone vibrated once, twice. RFID activated. Tier tag compromised. Envelope accessed. Matthews' team received the same signal. Within minutes, he and a partner were circling the block in an unmarked vehicle. They weren't here to cuff her on the spot. They were here to observe the next move. Karen didn't go home. She crossed the street and ducked behind her own hedges, thinking she was out of sight. She peeled the envelope open, probably expecting documents or personal data. But what she found instead was a bold black notice inside that said, "This package has been monitored and tampered with. Your actions have been logged and reported to federal authorities." I watched from my window as Karen's face turned sheet white. She dropped the paper like it had stung her and began frantically trying to shove the torn envelope back together. Her hands trembled. The sweat began to bead. I almost felt bad. Almost. Just as she turned to rush back toward my mailbox, likely to return the package and pretend nothing happened, Matthews and his partner stepped out from their car. Calm. Silent. ID's out. "Ma'am," he called. "Can we have a word?" Karen froze. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. She just wilted. She turned around slowly, holding the half-destroyed package like a child caught breaking something expensive. I was just trying to. You were just tampering with a marked federal parcel," Matthews said, his voice ice cold. Which, in case you're unaware, is a violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 1708, punishable by fines and up to 5 years in prison. Karen looked at me then, standing just outside my front door now, arms crossed. "I didn't know," she croaked. "I thought it was mine." Really? I said. Your name is Jonathan R. Last name now? Her eyes darted between us. I thought. Matthews cut in again. Save it. We've been monitoring this activity for over a week now. You've committed multiple counts of theft, tampering, and unlawful access to personal property. We have it all recorded. I didn't think it was serious. She nearly screamed, voice cracking. I thought, look, I was just curious, okay? You keep getting mail with fancy labels, and I thought what are you even doing in this neighborhood? Delivering karma, I said. Karen was escorted back to her home and informed that she'd be receiving formal notice of investigation. Matthews was kind enough to explain that she wasn't under arrest yet, but that her actions would now be part of an official case file submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office. That was enough to break her. She sobbed, right there on the sidewalk next to Muffin. And I stood in front of my mailbox, smiling just enough to be remembered. You think after being caught red-handed by federal postal investigators, a normal person would lay low, maybe issue an apology, or at least stop acting like a surveillance drone with too much time and not enough restraint. But not Karen. No, Karen was built different. Within 48 hours of her little sidewalk breakdown, she was back to patrolling the block like she hadn't just been busted in a felony-level offense. Sure, she wasn't going near my mailbox anymore, not physically, but she was whispering, talking to neighbors, telling people that it was all a misunderstanding, that she was being targeted by a government employee with an attitude, and my personal favorite, that I had forged the whole thing to make her look bad. I didn't have to do anything to make Karen look bad. She had done that all by herself. But what I couldn't tolerate was how quickly she started twisting the narrative. So I decided it was time to expose her publicly, on her own turf. It just so happened the HOA had a monthly neighborhood meeting coming up, one of those badly organized gatherings that normally no one cared about unless there was a fence code violation or someone's recycling bin had been left out past the sacred 4 p.m. deadline. But this one had buzz. I could feel it. Word of Karen's incident had leaked, just enough to get people interested. I overheard 2 different neighbors mention mail drama and postal beef while walking their dogs. That's when I knew everyone would be there. And I was ready. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a space that usually looked like a retirement home's bingo room, with plastic chairs in a half circle and lukewarm coffee on a folding table. Karen, of course, was front and center. She wore a blazer like she was appearing in court and had her HOA clipboard sitting in front of her like it was the Constitution. The moment I walked in, the room went a little quieter. I could feel the eyes on me, some curious, some sympathetic, a few skeptical. I didn't care. I took a seat in the back and waited. After the usual nonsense about dog leash reminders and shrub trimming guidelines, Karen cleared her throat and said, "Before we close, I'd like to address some rumors floating around regarding a supposed incident involving myself and one of our neighbors." She looked right at me. I smiled. Karen continued, "First and foremost, I want to say that I've always acted in the best interest of this community. Any confusion about recent events has been entirely due to miscommunication and exaggerated claims." "Oh, really?" I stood up. "Funny, Karen. I thought trying to steal someone's mail was a little more than a miscommunication." "Yes." Murmurs. Karen's eyes widened just enough to betray the fact that she didn't expect me to speak. "Let me clarify something for the group," I said, stepping toward the front of the room. "I'm not just a postal worker. I'm a licensed federal employee under the United States Postal Service with specialized training in fraud detection and mail tampering investigations. That means when someone breaks into my mailbox or steals a parcel, it's not a neighborhood squabble, it's a federal offense." Karen interrupted. "No one broke into anything. I thought it was a misdelivery. That package had no name, and it was left open." "No, it wasn't," I said calmly. "The package was marked with a unique barcode identifier. It had my name, my address, and a tamper-proof seal. Not to mention an RFID sensor and 3 surveillance angles recording you taking it, hiding it under your sweatshirt, and tearing it open behind your hedge." A full silence settled over the room. Someone in the back whispered, "Holy crap." I tapped my phone, opening the live feed from the server. The screen behind the podium had HDMI capability. I knew because I tested it 2 days ago. With a single cable, I mirrored my screen onto the projector. And there it was. Footage of Karen removing the package. Footage of her crouching in her yard, tearing the envelope open, face caught clearly by the decal cam. Here's the moment she opened a sealed envelope, I narrated. Despite the clearly printed warning on the outside, Karen's voice rose an octave. You can't show that without my permission. That's illegal. Actually, I replied, it's perfectly legal when it's recorded on private property, especially when part of a federal investigation. Inspector Matthews from the Postal Inspection Service is already processing the evidence. You should expect formal charges in the next few weeks. People started shifting in their seats. Karen looked around, desperate for support. You're all just going to believe him. You think this is fair? Steve, one of the quieter board members, raised a hand. Karen, there's video of you stealing someone's mail. We're way past fair. Another woman stood up. This isn't the first time you've overstepped. You harassed me last year over my mailbox paint color. You made my teenage son cry because his music was too loud. Maybe this time you finally went too far. Karen's mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out. It was over. Publicly. Irrevocably. She slumped back in her chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to make this public. But I wasn't going to let a neighborhood tyrant tamper with my mail, then lie about it to save face. You crossed the line, Karen. And now you'll face the consequences. And with that, I turned and walked out of the meeting. The silence behind me spoke louder than applause ever could. After the HOA meeting, the social ecosystem of Rosebriar Lane did what suburban neighborhoods do best, buzz. But it wasn't just whispers over hedges or passive-aggressive lawn greetings anymore. No, this time the whole street seemed to realign around a singular, satisfying truth. Karen had finally been brought down. By the time the weekend rolled around, her once dominant status as the queen of neighborhood nitpicking had eroded into a hollow shell of side eyes and icy avoidance. The very people she used to scold for mismatched trash bins and non-regulation holiday wreaths now crossed the street to avoid her entirely. She stopped walking Muffin altogether. Or maybe she just didn't want anyone to see her. The once proud HOA president who used to strut around like she was deputized by the federal government herself had gone full recluse. Of course, Karen's silence wasn't just social, it was legal. About 2 weeks after our very public showdown, a plain white envelope arrived at my house, marked with the official seal of the United States Postal Inspection Service. Inside was confirmation. Karen was now under formal federal investigation for mail theft and tampering. The document outlined a case number, the charges being reviewed, and the evidence submitted. Yes, including all surveillance, RFID logs, and the signed affidavit I'd given to Inspector Matthews. I'd been told to keep the case details quiet from the public, but in neighborhoods like ours, the silence was its own megaphone. And then came the subpoena. Karen was summoned to appear in federal court. Not a local courthouse, not some slap-on-the-wrist citation, but a real hearing downtown. The charge: violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 1708, theft or receipt of stolen mail matter generally. Maximum penalty? Up to 5 years in prison and a hefty fine. The plea deal her lawyer tried to negotiate didn't go over well. From what I heard through official channels, Karen insisted she was set up, that the entire thing was a conspiracy. Unfortunately for her, when you're caught on multiple camera angles holding stolen mail, opening it on your own property, there's not much wiggle room for plausible deniability. But even before the court could fully sentence her, Karen had lost more than her legal footing. She'd lost her status. The HOA board convened an emergency vote 3 days after the meeting. Without debate, they unanimously voted to remove Karen as president of the HOA, strip her of her voting privileges, and prohibit her from holding any position of authority within the community going forward. Her former lapdog board members stayed quiet. No one defended her. No one cried foul. It was as swift and clean as a guillotine. After that, Karen's property became a sort of cautionary monument. Her mailbox, once pristine and regulation approved, now leaned slightly, untouched for days at a time. Her blinds stayed shut. The porch lights, always on timers before, now flickered at odd hours like she'd forgotten to reset them. A neighbor later told me Karen's husband had taken a job in another city and was staying in a hotel while things cooled down. The same neighbor said they saw Karen crying in her car one night, gripping the steering wheel with both hands like she was trying not to scream. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. She didn't just break the law, she violated the very system she pretended to uphold. She used her position to intimidate others, to spy, to steal, and to lie. And when she got caught, she tried to spin the narrative instead of taking responsibility. But the story didn't end with her resignation. About a month later, a small flyer appeared in everyone's mailbox, everyone's but hers. It was from the HOA. They were holding a community cleanup event and asked for volunteers. At the bottom of the flyer in small print, it read, "Community service hours available." You better believe Karen showed up. Not because she wanted to, but because the court mandated it as part of her plea agreement. She wore a reflective vest, handed out trash bags, and tried not to make eye contact with anyone. People nodded politely, but no one talked to her. One dad offered her a granola bar. She declined. That day, I walked past her with my mail in hand, real mail, untampered, freshly delivered, and gave her a nod. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She just looked down and kept picking up garbage. And as I walked back to my porch, I felt a deep, satisfying peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stood up not just for myself, but for the system I worked for. For every letter that never arrived. For every package stolen and every neighbor bullied. For the postal workers who dealt with far worse and couldn't fight back. Karen learned the hard way that mail isn't just mail. It's protected by law, by tradition, by the kind of integrity that lives deeper than rules written on paper. And that messing with a man who carries that badge in his soul, that's a special kind of stupid. So now every time I see that blue mailbox on the corner standing straight and strong, I smile just a little wider. Because I know it's not just steel and paint. It's a symbol. And Karen, she's just a footnote in a story of justice, envelopes, and karma with tracking.